Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwindt.
I'm Jared Pechaček.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 59th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all. It is, well, strictly speaking, almost February. It will be February by the time you hear this, and we hope you have a good one. And it's been a full month for me. I will not try and dwell on the bad stuff. Let's just say that there's been some personal losses. I'll leave it at that. And my best to the spirits of those gone. But it's not a place for me to go on about that. But I will say that I got to do something very Tolkien fun related, and that is see all three of the movies, extended versions, proper color grading even, at the local Alamo one Sunday after another here. It's something they do annual time, and it was really interesting seeing when and where the audience did and didn't react these days. So, for instance, there were some things I remember there were big emotional moments at the time that people didn't do as much this time. It was sort of like, okay, that's kind of interesting. But did everyone was there a theater-wide chuckle when Sean Bean says, one does not simply walk into Mordor? Yes, there was. Meme poisoned.
Yeah.
Still, though, it was nice finally seeing the extended version of Return of the King on a theater screen, since I had seen the first two in the extended in the theaters at the time. Long story, films, we've done the films, we have done the films. So we can move on. How are things with you guys in general, though?
My life has been both ruined and made complete by adopting a dog, which we got him 3 weeks ago today, and he's like a year old. He's just like a scruffy little terrier mix, like 30 pounds. He's a good boy. His name is Moose, but wow, I have to lead this discussion, and I have dog brain. Awesome.
Perfect for discussing a tech.
Actually,
mogul.
you know what? I think this is because this is like my own little personal bugbear. I think maybe I can rouse myself into a leadership role. I am learning to be a better leader with this dog. So there we go.
That's a fine thing indeed. So, we will of course look forward to the eventual day when Moose takes the lead on one of the podcast episodes himself. He has thoughts, I'm sure. He can do the dog episode, so it will happen. So
the Juan episode.
The Juan episode. Yeah, Juan-centric, the most heroic dog. We can go on. Check out Juan. Juan's great. Anyway, though, it is time to progress on with the news, such as there is. So anyway, so we will go into that. Jared, please do take it away.
Yeah, as Ned hinted, there's very little to report on this month. At some point, the publicity gears will start to grind more for both the War of the Rohirrim and the second season of the Rings of Power. We will idly note that the rumors about the latter mentioned by the OneRing.net lately seem, how to put it, a bit credulity stretched. Though after the decisions of the first season alone, who knows? There is a small Tolkien-related item to note otherwise, though, and that would be the abdication of Queen Margrethe of Denmark in favor of her son after a decades-long reign. In and of itself, this wouldn't be worth noting, honestly, but it's a side effort of Margrethe that has long been impetus to Tolkien fandom. Her one-chapter each black and white illustrations, fully executed for publication by British artist Eric Fraser for various editions of The Lord of the Rings. They were first published in a Danish translation of the book, but have become very well known as they were featured in the Folio Society's edition of the text, as they are to this day. Tolkien himself was said to appreciate the similarity between his own artistic work and hers, and Rainer Unwin liked to tell the story about how he was embarrassed to realize that they had accidentally turned one of her images upside down during initial publication. If work by artists such as Alan Lee and John Howe, among many others, have become more associated with Tolkien over time, Margrethe's work is worth looking at, and we'll provide a link to some samples in the show notes.
I have owned a copy of the Folio Society edition for a couple of decades now, along with their versions of The Hobbit and Silmarillion, and I have to say I really enjoy her artwork. Again, it's syncretic because it's a combination with Fraser, who redid the original drawings for proper full publication. But it's a really good fusion, and it's her own vibe, I guess is the best way to put it. It's especially notable because she's not, while she is apparently shown a various interest in art and design over the course of her reign, she's not in or of herself a trained artist. I believe her training was more in in terms of formal academic or economics or something like that. So
I mean, you
good
want
thing
that
for,
in a queen, but
even if you're just sort of keeping an eye on things, hey, all the rest of it, a remarkable figure in any event. But the Rainer Unwin anecdote about turned upside down, I'm pretty positive that's about a depiction of the Nazgul at one point, because there's one of the ones in Black Rider form where it's very much it's not impressionistic, that's not her style, but the vividness, especially as rendered by Fraser, of this sort of chaotic black shape on a horse is the type of thing when you look at it, it's like, oh yeah, that's what it is. But if you're not careful, you can be like, I don't know, and accidentally flip it around. So it might be that. It might have been something else. So who can say? But to give an idea of the impact of it, the Folio Society editions of Hobbit and Silmarillion are not done by her, but the drawings are very much done in line with her work. So they pretty much said, like, this is the standard. We're going to keep it for all this. And it makes for an interesting adaptational twist. I really, really like it. So it's fun to talk about that rather than the One Ring Net rumors about the Rings of Power. Let's in fact forget I ever mentioned that.
That's a way for Amazon to discover moles. Is like, I bet they feed different information to different people, and those people feed it to the OneRing.net, and then Amazon knows who the mole is and can take appropriate retribution. That's my little too poisoned by alias and writing an outline for my own pilot sort of take on that, because some of it is they're talking about a whole episode about Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, and
there's no way,
no, absolutely
not a chance in hell.
No,
please no.
I was also baffled by their mention of the long-held fan theory that Tom Bombadil and Goldberry are Melkor and Ungoliant, serving their term, basically, serving their prison term, which is I've never heard that. And if it's a fan theory that I've never heard, how?
Yeah.
Fan theory in quotes.
Yeah. Doesn't make any sense. Anyway.
None.
It's a bananas. I was reading this piece with every fresh sentence was a slap in the face. I don't from a different direction every time.
Yeah.
What the hell are you looking at, you people? It's so weird.
Well, all I can say is that I seem to remember in the run-up to the first season, at least a couple of years before it finally dropped, there was the idea that sort of if there are going to be nude scenes, there were no nude scenes.
Right.
Because that's all an intimacy coordinator is for, is the nude
exactly.
scenes. There should have been. I think there should have been.
Something else to look at? I don't
know.
They
should have been naked going to Valinor.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Yeah.
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 Requirement to get in.
Unironically, yeah. That makes perfect sense.
It's just, anyway.
Boy, all of a sudden the scene at the end of Lord of the Rings when they all get on the last ship takes on a new thing. Oh, you must be naked when you get on the ship. What?
Well, I mean, given the... Oh, God, we're spending too much time on this already. I'm so sorry. No. But given the way the show tries to portray returning to Valinor is it's a reward, you're shedding Middle-earth, whatever, and they take they take off their armor or whatever it is and throw it over the side. I can't remember. It makes total sense in that context, thematically, for them to just okay, we're going to disrupt. You're going back to heaven naked.
Otherwise, not that much news, really, so let's just continue on and talk about main things. The topic of choice is Oriana's, as she deals with dog stuff, but still, it is Oriana's to talk about, and so please begin.
Yes. So, the risk of loving a work of high fantasy written by an aging British man is that no matter how many times the British guy tells you not to invent the torment nexus, at least one of the readers is going to be a person powerful enough to invent the torment nexus, and they're going to do it, and they're going to claim to draw inspiration from that work. Peter Thiel is one of those readers. He's just the most visible, though. I really want to talk about why Thiel and his other sort of techno-fascists fundamentally and seemingly willingly misunderstand the work they claim to be inspired by, and why it's incumbent on us to call these guys out on their, sorry for the profanity, bullshit. Techno-fascist is kind of a redundant term these days, it feels like. While fascism advocates for a return, I'm trying to pronounce the V spelling of return to an imagined past, it also fetishizes technology and a very narrow definition of quote-unquote progress, as laid out by Umberto Eco in his essay Fascism. If you haven't read it, please do. The Italian futurists were connected with the, quote, fascist culture of youth, which we'll talk about the fascist culture of youth / eternal youth more later. Foreshadowing? But so how do these men, and they are kind of almost uniformly men, how do they reconcile their tech worship with Tolkien's negative attitude towards technology used to surveil, coerce, kill, destroy the environment, or even just kind of make noise? And the thing is, they don't. As you see with certain religious movements in the Bible, the Peter Thiels of the world simply ignore the parts of Tolkien's works which don't support their individual beliefs. But okay, actually, we've kind of gotten ahead of ourselves. Who the hell is Peter Thiel, and why are we talking about him? He co-founded PayPal way back in the day, made an insane amount of money, invested in Facebook and a bunch of other companies, acquired a level of wealth that is truly sickening. It's not quite as bad as others, your Bezoses, your Musks, who actually, Thiel and Musk, Musk had X as his company that was doing a similar thing to PayPal. They merged. So they very much were in each other's orbit, but had kind of a falling out. So a lot of media people might know Thiel as the guy who funded the Hulk Hogan lawsuit that bankrupted Gawker. But we're going to talk him as the guy behind Palantir Technologies, Mithril Capital Management, and Valar Ventures. You can probably guess where Peter Thiel got those names from, but I don't want to only focus on him because he has plenty of company. Lord of the Rings and Tolkien worship is just kind of a thing in Silicon Valley, and one of Thiel's most prominent proteges is Palmer. Should have looked up how to pronounce this beforehand. Lucky? Not Lukey, right? It's, but anyway, Palmer is the co-founder of Anduril Industries, and we will talk more about just how evil that company is in a little bit. The thing that these people have in common is that they think they're Aragorn, right? But they're actually Saruman, or in Thiel's case, he feels a bit more Sauron-ish. Even when press coverage of these companies is not fawning, it still makes, in my opinion, a lot of mistakes. There's a Wired article about Anduril from 2018, and it ends by saying that Anduril is, quote, a company named after an avenging sword, which isn't actually what that is. Nope, not even a little bit. Anduril is the sword that is reforged from Narsil, the blade that cut the one ring from Sauron. It's one of the more famous quotable lines from the Fellowship.
From Sauron's hand.
Thank you, Jared. That inflection was incredible. The sword has nothing to avenge. The men and elves won. This lack of analysis really lets these guys off the hook, I think, and we're here to put them back on it. Before we go, I have so many other notes, but Jared and Ned, do you remember when you first heard about these guys, the sort of Silicon Valley techno-fascists, and their Tolkien fandom, and what your reaction to it was?
I'm trying to remember exactly. I mean, when I think, Thiel as a person, I think came to my mind, to my attention, maybe late 2000s. I'm not positive in general, because I mean, it's kind of weird. It's sort of I certainly knew companies more than people, which is probably the way they want it, really. And just don't look at the man behind the curtain to look at the man behind the curtain type thing. Just look at the shiny product. And, there's only, Silicon Valley is itself just a usefully nebulous concept. Oh, it's Silicon Valley. It explains everything. explains nothing. So, but certainly I knew people who worked at various businesses there and things like that. So it's like, okay, yeah, that's where a lot of things are based. Fine. And that's been the case ever since I've been alive, pretty much. Newer ones have come along. But I think he sort of crystallized a bit with the whole Gawker thing. It's like, oh, there's an actual, who is this guy? Type thing. So it just sort of came along. And I just remember when the Palantir announcement happened of the company, and I'm like, what in the world are you talking about? That's just my reaction. It was so patently, how to put this? This is going to sound terrible, but it's kind of true. It's such a goober thing to do.
Yeah.
It's such a, wow, this is really, really smart and cool to do if you're frickin' 15, and your fandom is a little too enthusiastic and everything is just so like, ooh, I'll call it this. It's like, sure, but you're not 15. Yeah. That's the thing. So, and maybe mentally you are. I don't know. Nothing against the 15-year-olds out there. The point is, most of you grow out of it. So, I did. We all did. So, when I say that, I say that sense of certain, how to put it, not unreconstructed fandom, more like, unthinking fandom might be the best way, or something that sort of like tunnel visions on something and you lock it into it. You're thinking, oh, wow, that's a cool term, a thing that hasn't been used in time in the real world. So you put it in there and it becomes something that just sounds like a cool word if you know nothing about Lord of the Rings, which, for all we talk about what we do, we realize it's a subset, if a popular one, of a much wider cultural web. And if you do know what it is, it's an in-the-know joke. And what is the idea? Just like, try and draw people to you? Why? So I guess is the thing. And for me, it would just make me seem like, you're a dork. That's the kind of thing. That was kind of the initial reaction. But then you read into what it was talking about, and I'm like, what in the world? Because you found out about all the surveillance and everything else. It's like, yeah, you got this wrong, buddy. So, I'll stop there. So, Jared, do you want to throw in?
I think I hadn't really heard of Peter Thiel at all until the Gawker thing happened. And even then I was like, I have no idea who this is.
Right.
Despite having watched The Social Network multiple times, and he is in there. But my first exposure, I guess, was hearing about the company Palantir. I forget the context, but I saw it and I was like, this is a joke, right?
Right.
And then kind of forgot about it because I was like, it's just another supervillain billionaire doing his thing, which was a mistake in some way. Yeah, and I hadn't even heard of some of the other companies until researching this, which I don't know why I would. I'm not a tech reporter or I don't follow stocks or anything. So, but yeah, it was like that instant kind of like, this is somebody who has fundamentally misunderstood what he's talking about. Good thing he won't affect my life. This was in 2015 or something, so I didn't realize, of course, just how much he would affect my life.
Yeah, that was the thing. It's just sort of... Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Oriana.
Well, so it's interesting, Ned, what you were talking about, the use of the names and they come across as nothing. It's very much the Ready Player One version of this. And actually, so the behavior is very much oh wow, okay, this sheer rote memorization and regurgitation of facts and names and whatnot. Quoting names and lines free from context is sort of the ideal. And what's kind of funny is in that same Wired article I was talking about Anduril from 2018, Palmer Luckey tells the writer, quote, a story about hanging out in VR with Ready Player One author Ernest Cline. Sure explains a lot. And what really strikes me about this is that in the world of the Lord of the Rings, there are lore masters. Knowledge is important, but wisdom is more important than pure knowledge and
correct interpretation of what you know and correct application, not just being able to regurgitate the rhymes of lore or whatever about 7 stars and 7 stones. You got to frickin' know what that refers to and extrapolate from there. And these guys aren't doing that on any level.
And Thiel, Jared and I read the Max Chafkin biography of Peter Thiel called The Contrarian for this episode. Good job, us. Just a nice little pat on the back, because I actually skimmed a huge chunk of it because
I skimmed to the end.
Yeah, right.
But because I was for me, the grief is still too near. Because it's getting into, for those who haven't read it, it's getting into the 2016 election and the fallout from that, and then the start of the pandemic. And I forget when the book came out, but it's very recent. So yeah,
I want to say 2021 or something.
Definitely post election, Biden won.
Yeah,
I think it must have come. There's no way it could have come out. I don't know what I was going to say. Anyway, yeah, it's heading up into really recent events, and I was like, I already know this part, and I don't need to read it again.
But it is fascinating. I think my favorite detail about Peter Thiel and his Tolkien fandom is this just reveals what an absolute poser the man actually is. So in the biography, we learned that Thiel's senior quote in his high school yearbook was from The Hobbit, the Rankin Bass animated special.
Right?
It's lyrics.
Oh, God, yeah.
At first I thought, am I missing something? Because I hadn't read, it introduces, it's he had a quote from The Hobbit, and it's just lyrics, and I was like, those are not lyrics from any song from
I had the same experience.
I was like, the greatest adventure? No. And then the song wormed its way into my stupid brain.
Quote the worst part of that movie,
We'll throw a link in the show notes to that episode. That song still ruins those two.
I physically recoiled from the book at that point.
I could not deal with it. But that's my little favorite detail. But the most revealing anecdote is where a 4-year-old Thiel is scarred by his father coldly explaining death to him, which seems to have induced a lifelong monomaniacal urge to live forever, which where have we heard that before? Which is so Thiel is very interested in tech that lengthens life, has said that we must fight death at all cost, and actually his misreading of Tolkien also extends to his misunderstanding of Christianity. He's been a lifelong Christian, he was raised Christian, but he has this bizarre quote where he's talking about how Christianity says we must fight death at all costs, and it's what? No, the whole point of Christianity, eternal life only comes through Jesus Christ and God.
And it doesn't happen on Earth. You
does not.
And then you live again eternally. It's not something you can achieve here and now. This is 1000% a C.S. Lewis villain from That Hideous Strength. Is this guy who's talking about having eternal life on Earth through biomechanical means. It's absolutely... And he quotes the Bible to, heavy air quotes, prove it. Anyway.
Just completely insane. So Thiel has actually, signed up to have his body frozen, and I was just reading Mother Jones...
I'd freeze his body right now.
I was going to
say,
do we have to wait? Right?
Don't sue us, Peter Thiel. We're just joking.
Don't sue. All of this is in my opinion, but in my opinion, Peter Thiel is actually, this is not in my opinion. He supported apartheid because his father worked for one of those horrific uranium mines. And he went to school in South Africa for a few years, and was no, the system works. I don't know what you're talking about. It
would be a mistake to apply American values to this system or something like that. Was his answer when somebody asked him about it? He denied. I will say the biography is careful to note he denies ever having supported it, but people who knew him in college are no, he was. He
absolutely did.
Yeah, not as I understand it, not a vocal waving flags keep apartheid, but if somebody asked him, he'd be no, it's fine.
It was fine. I was there and it was fine.
Yeah, I didn't experience anything bad.
I wonder why. Why. But yeah, so he is also, I was just reading this article in Mother Jones about Silicon Valley, I guess just rich people in general, super, super rich people who want to come back to life after their bodies have died, and we have the technology to do that. They want to ensure that their money comes with them, and there is no real legal way to do that right now. So of course they're working on that. Isn't that
this is some Egyptian pharaoh shit?
Right?
Like, just if you love it so much, get buried with it. Like,
or do the Chinese tradition where you burn paper money, which sounds like an ideal way to do it. It's like, hey, you need something in the afterlife, we'll just send it this way. It's like, perfect.
But yeah, what stands out so much to me about this is that, like, Teal claims to be this fan, has to know the story of Numenor. He has to. And he's just doing it anyway? He's just doing it anyway? Like, is it like, ooh, Ar-Pharazôn, that, like, cool dude who was right
he's
to
just
rebel.
Misunderstood.
Yeah. There's much to be made, I think we were talking about this in the Discord, of like a lot of Teal's sort of proteges, people in his circle of influence, hold up the Soviet Lord of the Rings, or actually it's post-Soviet.
It's post-Soviet, yeah.
The Russian sort of retelling from the Mordor point of view.
Is held up, is held in high regard, where it's like Mordor was actually a land of technology and they couldn't handle it.
It was those horrible elves and their, like, backward Luddite thinking that were just making war on a well-meaning technocrat or whatever. And it's like, no. I will say, this is totally aside from Peter Thiel, but I really hate that kind of, like, fan fiction or retelling where it's like, what if everything that was good in the original is actually evil? And what if the evil was just misunderstood? Like, I fucking hate Wicked, for instance.
I was just going to say, do we have thoughts about Wicked?
We do! We did! The book. The musical is doing its own thing in that regard, but the book, I was... Anyway, it's the same kind of thing where it's like, well, let's question everything. It's like that you're not really engaging, in a way, with what it's trying to tell you. You're engaging with what you want to say to it, and that's a different thing.
But hey, man, I did my own research.
Yeah, I Googled it.
Oh my God. Which you can no longer do. Google search results are so bad these days.
I just go straight... Because of people like
Peter Thiel.
Hey. Well, maybe to sort of throw in something. Well, two thoughts, I think, at this point I'm having, just, thinking about what you talked about here, Oriana and Jared, is that, first off, this idea of the deliberate misreading, or whether even deliberate, whether unconscious, maybe. It puts me in mind of, and I think both apply, it puts me in mind of something that a couple of stories I've seen recently from a bunch of, from writers in the field who can talk about this. I think most notably the writer and reporter Tim Alberta, whose book on sort of the crisis of modern evangelical / fundamentalist Christianity in time of Trump, post-Trump, essentially, and where so many things are sort of like leaning away. He uses the example of what happened to his own father's congregation. His father was a minister, and founded a congregation, and how it and so many others are ones where he sort of noticed over time that in recent years, pretty much, a lot, not all, but a lot of congregants were clearly more shifting towards a view of something that was not really taking the text into account, shall we say. It was more sort of like, who do we hate these days and why, and who is telling them that? We can all think of our obvious examples. A parallel story that I've read in this regard, and this is one of those things that sounds urban legendish, but it was reported by, if not Alberta, then one of his colleagues or something like that, and I read there, so I'm assuming it was not dreamed up out of thin air, although you could easily see this type of thing being, if you're not cautious, but I choose to believe it was real. They did quote somebody about this. It was another priest in another minister, rather, in another independent evangelical congregation, and something about how after a sermon one day in a couple of recent years, someone came up to him and said, "Was like, why are you approaching all this woke stuff? Something that's almost caricature." He basically saying, "I was preaching the Sermon on the Mount. It's right in there. These are words there." And apparently the response from this congregant was along the lines of, "Well, that's what happened then. That doesn't apply now." And that's a very, we can go into questions of, biblical authority and things like this, interpretation, but that is clearly a case of, this is something that in the text that I'm following in theory believe that doesn't jive with my worldview. I therefore ignore it. And that's, in its own way, what we're seeing here with the type of, Thielish reaction to sort of like, let's just borrow the good stuff and apply it to this. And again, we can go on to further things from there. But I think one of the things that's interesting to me about him naming it after after the Palantir. Now, of course, I'm not expecting him necessarily to Thiel to have read the actual Unfinished Tales, where there's a whole section on the Palantir in there, and how the closest it gets to essentially Tolkien explaining a piece of, let's call it, technology in a relative sense. It's I think as close as he ever gets to that and all the rest of it, even though he really, he does not get into / is clearly not interested in the actual workings of it. It just was created. They happen. But he talks about it as something that, you have to align it the right way. There's an actual top and bottom to it. You sort of, it's a sort of sense to it, which I love that idea, a little detail there. And how that works, and how one, like how the main one is sort of like the central conduit, and how the individual ones can focus. And, I love those little details. And I can see how that would appeal to someone like Thiel going like, this is how to explain things. But it's clearly as you said yourself, Oriana, a total misreading of what happens with the most famous user of a Palantir in the entire Lord of the Rings, which is obviously Denethor, and how Denethor, what happens with it. I mean, you can explain that if you like, sort of like where the misreading is going on there, but it's so patently obvious.
It's crazy. Yeah, we should. Okay, I don't want to go into this assuming everyone knows what Palantir actually does. So it claims to be a company that allows businesses and organizations to use data. Doesn't that sound totally prosaic, right? It's a horrifying $50 to $60 billion, like the market cap depends on, stock movement, et cetera. Anyway, $50 to $60 billion surveillance company whose primary customers are defense departments and cops, two entities which I'm pretty sure Tolkien took a dim view of, certainly defense departments. Like, the company has been accused of human rights violations by several entities, including Amnesty International. It's being used by Homeland Security and ICE in the US, and now has a contract with the NHS in the UK. And it's also being used by the government of Israel right now. I'll just leave that there for now. Certainly in the US, it's being used to separate migrant families, do workplace raids to round up undocumented immigrants, and basically it just enables our security and white supremacist states. So that's really fun. I don't know. What's kind of funny is, the company actually grew out of tech created and used at PayPal to catch fraud and money laundering. This is, again, according to Chafkin's biography, which is good, though there's kind of an interesting thing in the epilogue I want to talk about at some point. But according to the biography, after 9/11, Thiel really leaned hard into Islamophobia and wanted to use the tech to catch terrorists, and thus was born Palantir. But what's so darkly funny is that in typical Silicon Valley fashion, is that according to Chafkin, quote, "For years, its intelligence software was effectively useless." End quote. It was so ineffective, the NYPD dropped them. Oh my God, do you understand? I need everyone listening to understand how garbage your company and technology has to be. At least at that point in time, this was the early 2000s. They seem to have improved significantly, but also maybe not. So the NYPD is wasteful and stupid, and right now there's a conical robot in the Times Square station that has to be guarded by a phalanx of cops to prevent anyone from doing anything to it. It's oh my God. And even they, in the aftermath of 9/11, were bro, we can't use this.
Success, great success.
And it was a big money loser. Again, in Silicon Valley fashion. Also, Thiel himself is not a big technical. He went to law school. He worked as a corporate lawyer for 7 months, and then was no, I'm going to be a VC guy, basically. So he gets other people to do the actual work. He is the most capitalist you can find, which again is really, it's just something that Tolkien was not about. I mean, God knows the guy hated taxes, but he did like creating things himself.
Mm-hmm. And he was not super into the big, like, he would hate a big tech baron.
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah.
Like, especially a tech baron who misunderstood his own work.
It is the only, I mean, not the only, but like one of the sad things about Tolkien not being around right now, I know this sounds crazy, but is that we can't have him smacking down the Peter Thiels of the world and being like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Please, no, do not do this. There's also, we should probably talk too about Anduril Industries, which I mentioned earlier, which is the Palmer Luckey company founded in 2017. The first order of business for this company was creating a, quote, virtual border wall between the U.S. and Mexico using sort of off-the-shelf technology that they just kind of patched together. In a TechCrunch article that quoted the Anduril website in 2018, they had this as part of their mission statement. Quote, look no further than statements by Chinese and Russian leaders to see their focus on technological dominance. They are devoting massive resources to win this battle for the future and also recruiting the best tech talent available to this cause. We must and will do the same. This is a clear, like, setting of Anduril, Flame of the West, as like, he, you know, it's, that is not mentioned, but like that is the implication for it's a dog whistle, and I hate that I can hear the dog. What does it say about me that I can hear the dog whistle? I don't love that.
It does feel very like the enemy has a ring. We should also have a ring,
right? The most Saruman shit you can do.
Yeah. It is baffling. I know, like, I feel like we've touched on this a few times, but like how people just misunderstand the meaning of the words that they are using. But also, they're using it as a dog whistle because, like, Tolkien is popular with white supremacists who think he agrees with them because they see him as trying to reclaim some kind of lost Western heritage or whatever. And it's like, no, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. He was working within a tradition. He was interested in that tradition. He was not trying to, I don't know, revive the white race or whatever.
No.
By reworking old myths. That's bananas. Like, why would you even think that? Just because somebody is an old white British man doesn't mean he's doing the things that you want him to be doing. Which we talked about in the imperialism episode. He was not, you cannot assume that somebody in a specific time and place has the same values as that time and place. He did in some ways. I'm not, again, we're not trying to be like woke Tolkien here, because like, no.
No, there's racism. There's definite racism there. Yes, there is. We've talked about it in a few things. Yeah.
But what's funny too is a lot of the time the racism in Tolkien, like towards the orcs especially, is like, he wasn't thinking about what he was doing in some ways, because for him, the orcs represent fascism.
Yeah.
They represent militarization and
totalitarian.
The dehumanization that happens when these gigantic, all-encompassing systems, like a surveillance state enabled by technology, when those are in place, you get people who are dehumanized. The fact that he used racialized language to describe the orcs is not great.
It's bad.
It's bad.
Yes, it's bad.
But he wasn't sitting there like, oh yeah, the invading hordes from the east. Exactly. In a way, again, there's a lot of like kind of really there's a lot of needles to thread here when talking about the orcs. But it is the orcs are fascist.
Yeah.
Or
they are like
controlled by a fascist.
Yes, confined within a fascist system and acting accordingly.
And in the Scouring of the Shire, we see how that type of fashion can apply to the hobbits just as well, depending on the situation. You know, they come home and what is I think I forget what Sam or is like, come on, all these rules and all this, orc rules or orc talk or things like that, sort of, and the implication could be, oh, this is just like the orcs. It's like, well, it's more like the system the orcs are in now presented here. So yeah.
That reminds me of something I wanted to say as well, is that these are people who think the main character of Lord of the Rings is Aragorn.
Right.
And as Orzana said, they see themselves as Aragorn. But the main character of Lord of the Rings is not the king who comes back. It's the hobbits who go back home and just kind of settle down in their like anarchist utopia again.
Yeah. where there's like 4 cops for the whole population, and the cops don't really, they're more like animal control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and there's like a postal service, but that's pretty much it. Like they're not
when they come to the Shire, the first thing they notice is the border patrol.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
And it's like, oh, this is bad, and we shouldn't do this. Like, Frodo's
it's bad
whole
that
journey.
the mill has been upgraded.
Yeah, we can't even upgrade the mill.
Yeah, well, he points out, I think it's in a letter, that the issue isn't so much that the new mill is more efficient. It's that they use it wastefully and it's polluting. Yeah. So
yes.
He's like anti-technology, but he's still like, yeah, it's fine if the mill produces more grain or more flour.
I was recently reading Blood in the Machine, which is a book about the Luddites that is really good. Like the actual Luddite movement. Right. Totally upended. Like, I will admit to just only ever having heard and used the term Luddite as like someone who rejects all forms of technology because they are bigoted and superstitious and like closed-minded. And but actually, no, it was a dang labor movement.
Yeah.
It was a labor movement, and like, oh, okay. We're like, okay, you can have a mill that is like more efficient, but it pollutes and it less jobs, and it's like, why would we do this? Why are we like progress for progress's sake is not necessarily what we should be doing, which is like the opposite of Teal and Silicon Valley's mindset in general. Is it's never actually creating anything new. It's taking something that already works and making it worse. Like
because
Uber,
they want to because they want to have ownership over something. They can't accept that something exists and isn't theirs.
Yeah.
So you get people like the guy who made the sub that went to the Titanic and got squished like a soda can.
Ooh.
Because he was like, it's the other ones, we're not going to do it the way everybody else has done it. We're doing it our own way. Like you're trying to claim something and then misunderstand what it is, and then there are consequences.
Oh no, consequences.
Yeah, I mean, nobody has gotten killed by an Andoril security tower or whatever yet, but like,
thank goodness.
Here's hoping. I mean, well, when I say people getting killed, I mean the inventors and not the people who are most likely to die from this kind of technology.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Like there's like a couple, Mithril Capital is just sort of a venture capital fund. Valar Ventures is interesting to me because it is not just an investment or, a venture capital fund, but it was specifically a way for Teal to buy New Zealand citizenship.
Yeah.
Like the company invested in a few New Zealand-based companies, and hey presto, here's some citizenship for old Thiepers Peel. Which, and like his citizenship also meant he could buy land that foreigners generally don't get to buy. And like what is actually really interesting to me, James Cameron, who has lived in New Zealand for like at least, I don't know, years, if not like a decade, like he moved production of the Avatar film series there. And it like seems to be very fully embracing the Kiwi lifestyle and is very invested in like its people and the land and whatever. And like he's only just this year going to become a New Zealand citizen, and he actually lives there. Peter Thiel spent like 12 days in New Zealand.
Yeah, he meets none of the qualifications that they have for citizenship.
Right.
But he was like, oh, but here's like some $3 million for you. I'm always like astonished at how kind of cheap it is to buy your way into like either political influence or like something like, obviously I don't have $3 million, but that's not a lot of money, like for a whole country. What, I don't know. You see like people making campaign donations of like $2,500 and it's like, is that really
would bankrupt me? There's no.
Yeah.
And hey, if it only takes $3 million to get citizenship, what do you think Amazon got out of them for putting the Rings of Power there with all the money they put in for that first season?
And then they took it away.
And then
they took it away.
Lesson of the Ring, right there.
One thing. This is like probably a good place to, I don't know, start to move towards wrapping up. But you might be wondering, like, wait, why are they allowed to name these like why is what is the legality of this? And like the Tolkien estate can't do shit about this. There's like no legal action you can take against an entity that just uses a word from a work as like a name for a business that is in no way associated with that work. So like the Denny's Hobbit Slam needs approval from the Tolkien estate through like New Line / Warner Brothers, but Palantir is not selling literal orbs. Anduril isn't selling replicas of the sword or like unlicensed merch. So unfortunately, we just have to deal with this like just kind of giant pile of shit. It's just like it smells. It's revolting to look at. You don't like hearing about it, and you just have to kind of live with it.
And
somehow.
The person who made it just walks away without any responsibility.
That would be, a responsibility. That would be too easy.
God, I was just going through this biography, and like I could only read maybe a chapter at a time over the span of weeks because I was like, I hate this guy.
Yeah.
And the biography is not like the author clearly doesn't like him. But the biography is not trying to get you to hate him. It's just presenting the facts.
Right.
But I was sitting there going, like, these facts suck. Like, this is a bad person. This is a bad person who has a lot of money and influence and misunderstands the values he claims to uphold and doesn't even uphold them half the time because it's all about self-interest for him no matter what else is going on. So he'll say he believes in something and then go and fund a candidate who is doing the opposite. Like, or he's, Teal is gay, but he's working with the Republican Party, which is not exactly trying to make the world safer for gay people.
Oh, but he's...
But he can leave. If
he gets to leave.
He gets to leave, yeah.
He gets
Whereas
to leave.
people like me have to stay in this country if something goes wrong, unless I can flee to Victoria or something. And like, anyway, it makes me mad a little bit.
It is infuriating. What is interesting about the biography, the thing that I wanted to talk about that's sort of at the end is the biographer being like, wow, it's weird that like Teal talks about wanting to like lengthen life at all costs and death is the enemy. But then he like doesn't do anything about COVID. Like he did. And it's like,
death is the enemy for Teal.
Yes.
It's not the enemy for anybody else.
Death is appropriate for everyone else. That is what they deserve for being inferior. He is superior. He is the Ubermensch. Like, it really is just that simple.
What's he want to do? Just walk around on an island by himself? I mean, if you want to be Robinson Crusoe, just buy your island and go off there and leave us all alone, buddy. There.
God,
go seasteading.
That was the other thing, is that he's so into this like seasteading and like micronation thing, but like the books repeatedly, not explicitly, but very implicitly call out this kind of secession from the world as a fundamental mistake. Yeah. Because it might be good for a while, but then things are going to go bad.
Yeah. Lothlorien is beautiful.
Numenor,
but...
Lothlorien.
Or even Valinor. Like, it is called out at some point as a mistake. Like, this was not the plan. They were supposed to be part of the world, helping people, and not just kind of go off in their own little walled garden.
Right.
And it's the root of not the problem with the Shire, but sort of like, the issue with the Shire is it too can be too insular. And I mean, their protection is conditional and, is sort of backfilled in by Tolkien later, the idea that Gandalf has set the Rangers to keep a watch on it and keep it safer while things are sort of like out there. But that's sort of like, okay.
But it clearly is, even though they're safe and happy, it's clearly leading to some kind of like not stagnation exactly, but they're so parochial that they can't really function sometimes.
Yeah.
And if you take any of the other hobbits outside of like the big four out of their context, they're just going to die. Like, this is not good.
They are susceptible to like
manipulation.
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed. So coming in, rigging those elections, or just whatever. Mysterious strongmen appearing. Parallels? I don't know. Applicability. Maybe the one thing I'll throw in, just as a sort of end thought, is that as you were saying about the point about mistaking oneself for Aragorn or mistaking oneself for the big hero. I mean, that is That is precisely the gift of Tolkien, to take it away from a vision where it's like the Robert E. Howard or the E.R. Edison view of what a heroic fantasy is like, where it's a heroic warrior of some sort doing all the stuff and putting it in the hands of someone or something else that is seemingly, not that. It's almost sort of like, can we get Tolkien but without Tolkien? Is kind of the idea, bizarrely enough. And that's one reason why I also think people respond to good old George R.R. Martin, because on the one hand, he's taking another view entirely, and he has his own crutches and limitations and things like that. But I think a lot of people respond to it because the idea is like, this is what I wanted, real fantasy, because this is where things are, just sort of like, the small people are just the small folk, the hobbits are the equivalent in that don't even factor. It's sort of like, that takes you back to the Edison problem again to a large degree, and so on and so forth. So it's this constant need. I think the best way to describe it is that Tolkien created something so vivid and detailed, and things where not everything was explained because the creation was so rich that you don't have to explain everything, and it gives this idea of this sort of immersive feeling that people want that feeling, for lack of a better term, without the actual moral lesson suggested by the overall arc of the story, whatever stories I should say, since they're multiple. And as a result, they sort of fall back on the more typical tropes, if you will. And that's where, especially Tolkien being who he was, a conservative small c Catholic, going like, no, the central message of the faith is this, and trying to interpolate that into what he was writing about in terms of what's going on there, with the idea of charity, goodness, and one's fellow man or hobbit or creature and all that. It's sort of like runs up against the greed of the world, and what do you get? So when people mistake, they conflate, and it happens all the time.
Yeah, I think my final, I swear, this time, sign off for this topic is, I think it's really, really important that these guys don't go as unchallenged over their use of Tolkienisms as they kind of currently do, and don't be that person, I guess. Like, but if you hear people talking about this, feel free to bring it up. If you're in a conversation about these techno-fascists, be like, yeah, and you know what also sucks is that they're using these names and professing, a love for a work that they either don't or don't want to fully understand. And I don't want to go gentle into that good night without yelling. There's so many things to yell about.
Yeah.
But this is one of those things that is actually pretty easy to yell about in conversation.
Look, nothing is more annoying. Speaking as one of them, nothing is more annoying than a Tolkien fan who is really insistent that you get everything correct. And we have a chance to weaponize this for good. Go out and be pedants.
Yeah.
Go for it.
You have a goal, people. You've been given your orders. Okay, it's time to look ahead to the next episode. The choice of topic has come around to Jared. What are we talking about next time, sir?
So from something that he would have hated to something that we know he really loved.
Ah.
Something that I am honestly surprised hasn't really come up in the years of doing this podcast. We're doing Beowulf, baby!
All right.
And I did say baby, spelled B-E-O-B-Y.
Jesus.
Thank you.
Anyway, Beowulf. He did a prose translation that was published, I think, in 2014. Yeah. So I'd like to refer to that, I think, but also just generally, Beowulf was huge for him.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And how was it huge for him?
Certain famous essay, of course, but we'll be talking
I'm
about
so excited.
That's part of your homework is the essay.
I had a huge... I'll save the actual anecdote for the episode, but I encountered Beowulf at a bizarrely young age, and I'm excited to talk about that.
All right, okay.
Same, actually.
Yes.
A fine choice of topic. It's certainly been one I've been thinking about myself for some time, so I'm glad you're taking the lead.
Sniped,
so it is well deserved, and yes, this is something that is indeed long overdue, and it'll be good for our 60th episode. 60 episodes, crazy.
Oh God, really? I didn't even think about that. Oh, okay.
It's not an anniversary episode, but it is our 60th episode, so another little milestone. Makes it pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, pretty great indeed. All right. Well, we'll come back to you with that next month. So we just want to say thank you, as always, very much for listening. And as always, please consider going to patreon.com/megaphonicfm and joining the Megaphonic FM Network Patreon. We would love to have you on board. It supports the entire network and all the various shows on it. We have all three of us, done our individual appearances on the Patreon-only podcast for Megaphonic Mug Up, where our friend and fellow host on the network, Mikey, interviewed all three of us, just talking about what we're into, things we do, stuff like that. My own episode was the most recent. It ran a couple of weeks ago. Did I talk about music a lot? Oh, yes, I did. And a few other things besides. So, again, even a small amount, just keep that going. It is great. You can find us on social media, various locations and spots and things all over the place. As always, the main account for the By-The-Bywater show is on Blue Sky, and you can find all three of us there as well. So we just want to wrap that up by saying thank you very much for listening. We always appreciate it. Any thoughts, welcome. Spread the word. I was hearing from folks like a friend of my sister's the other day, some people I met at a party, apparently mentioned to them that apparently I've made a couple more fans through them listen to the show, and I'm like going, great, keep going. So, spread the word out and let people know, and we always appreciate more listeners. So thanks very much. We will talk to you next time. Until then.